Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca,
And I'm Landon.
and we are extremely excited about our guest today. We have the wonderful Lars Nielsen on today. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to be with you today, Sunday morning.
Sunday morning, we woke up bright and early to do this because this, we feel, is an extremely important interview that we're going to be bringing you today. We came across a post just a few days ago about a new book that is out. Landon, do you want to tell us a little bit about the book? You wanted to share the title and read a little something from the beginning, and then we're going to have Lars introduce himself and just take off from there. I guarantee you guys, I feel like this episode, what's the word? Mind blowing, I think, is the word that's going to describe what we're about to talk about today. Do you want to tell everybody what the book is, Landon?
Yeah, absolutely. The book is called How the Book of Mormon Came to Pass. And I love the subtitle, The Second Greatest Show on Earth by Lars Nelson. And it's the first thing that caught me was the trigger warning that you put in the beginning of the book. And I just want to read that real quick. Because this is quite a claim, and so obviously a claim like this, you're going to have some backup, and it takes some guts to put that out with post-Mormons. You know they're going to ask every question and they're going to critique it. But the trigger warning says this book is not written for true believing Mormons, TBMs. If you are a TBM and you do not yet have a robust support system outside of the Mormon Church, do not read this book. If you continue to read it, you accept the responsibility of managing your immediate or eventual faith crisis in a way that will not result in harm to yourself or others. So that's quite quite a claim there. So we wanted to invite Lars on and have him kind of discuss the book and what's in it and the premises behind it. It's got quite a bit of research in it, a lot of work that you've put into it. So Lars, why don't you tell us about the book and why you make that claim?
Yeah, and also let's begin with Lars telling us about himself first. I think it's really important to find out who someone is before we discuss their actual product, right? So it probably all runs together. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm happy to do both. So I grew up in a family of 10 children. I'm the second and tied with my twin brother David for number 2 and number 3. Technically, I'm number 2 and he's number 3, and I have an older sister. But as the oldest boy in the family, I got the name Lars Peter Christian Nielsen from my great-great-grandfather, who was the first in our family to join the Mormon Church from Denmark and emigrate to the United States. And he had 3 wives, and we're all descended from a multi-generational Mormon background on multiple sides. And so I grew up with some of the most staunch, stark, McConkie Mormonism there is. And I feel like that really paved the way for me to have a very devout Mormon life for 20 to 30 years. And it made the faith crisis, I think, a little bit more severe for me than it does for some others. But I know that a lot of our readers and listeners out there are going to empathize with what it's like to grow up with both parents very strongly believing, multiple generations on both sides, a lot of patriarchy. Hopefully, when I look back on it, the more healthier aspects of patriarchy, but then some very unhealthy aspects as well. And so that really affected my development. It affected the way I looked at the world. I did decide to go on a Mormon mission. I was arguably, I always have to get the A in the class, and I kind of had to be an overachiever in seminary. So I kind of read everything that you possibly could read when we studied church history and especially the Book of Mormon. And that planted a lot of seeds and questions and doubts, things that I put on the shelf until later on in life. And when they finally came out, I realized, there is a better way of helping people understand how it all came to pass. And I feel like I have the responsibility to share insights and things that could be helpful to people in my community. I still consider myself to be a Mormon. I don't eschew the name, even though there's some scandal behind where the name Mormon really comes from. And I talk about that in chapter 15 in the book. But I love now understanding that I'm a post-Mormon. I can accept the good in my life. I can reject the things that didn't work for me and that might not work for others, without it causing pain anymore. There was a lot of anger and denial in those first few years, but I think I made it through that. And so I hope people will see that the tone that's in the book is scholarly, though I don't set myself up to be a historian. I've never called myself that. I've never called myself even an amateur historian. And though I do think that some of my ideas and the evidence that is primary, that is new, that's never been reported anywhere else, will be very interesting and even shake the positions of several bona fide historians, as well as Mormon apologists, of course. But I didn't write the book for them. I would like to say that I wrote the book for my children. We are in a mixed faith family, and all three of my children are at church right now with their mother, whom they love deeply. And I respect how she's raising the children. She has rights, the children have rights, and we are teaching them to live in a pluralistic society where there are very different worldviews, very different points of view, and not to talk about them too much or by name, but they are thriving in all aspects of life. And I think one of the reasons why they can do that is because they see that it can safely be done to live in a Mormon community and a post-Mormon community and an ex-Mormon community. And when we respect each other's rights, we can all live in our own worldview with happiness. Now, that doesn't mean that our marriage and our divorce weren't very messy and very difficult, but we are people who want and embrace the idea of learning and growth continually. And so I'm glad that that hasn't created ramifications for my children that are damaging or long lasting. However, I recognize that the things that I say in the book are going to cause a lot of people to reconfigure all of their Mormonism. And that can, if it happens too quickly, or if it happens out of sync with your loved ones, it can cause devastation and pain. And that is not my purpose. And so that explains the trigger warning that I'm telling you about. I dedicate the book to my wonderful friend Chris and to the late Susan, and who had a crisis of faith, and she didn't make it. I'm not suggesting that that would be a common problem because of what I'm writing in the book, but everything is statistical, and everything moves people from where they are to somewhere else. And if they're not ready to be moved, then they need support, they need help. And if you're a TBM and you don't have that support, I am telling you, I do not want your money. I do not want your eyes on my book. It's not worth it. Wait until you're ready, and then you can approach it when you are.
Yeah,
So,
I appreciate that so much, because we feel that way here on our podcast. We have many family members that, just don't watch.
yeah.
And I'm not ashamed of anything I'm saying at all. It's just that people are in different places, and I wouldn't want to cause harm. And so I just had this conversation yesterday. Just don't watch. It's totally fine. If you're ready, watch. But I'm not going to force this on anybody. And we respect that about your point of view, because this is something else. So tell us some more about your background. People might recognize your name a little bit. I don't know if you're comfortable explaining kind of who you are, but I feel like our viewers might be going, is that?
Yeah. Well, let me start by explaining when I got back from my mission, I served in Sonora, Mexico. I went to Boston to get a PhD. I got a master's degree in chemistry and then a PhD in chemistry. And then I rolled that program into an MBA at Harvard University. And so I was there in Boston for quite some time, had great experiences, wonderful leadership. When I was in Belmont, actually, I was the home teacher of David Bokovoy, which we all love and revere.
We love David. Yes.
A prince of a person. And he was getting his PhD in higher criticism at Brandeis at the time. And so we had some wonderful conversations. And he always let me into his house with such warmth every single time I would home teach. And sometimes you'd wonder, does he really want me to be there? There might be a game on, maybe BYU is playing. And he was always so warm. And I would like to think that in writing the book, that I reflect the tone and the kindness, but also the depth and sincerity that people like David Bokovoy have. I am not a scholar of higher criticism like he is. I do use the term in the book, and I think that I do quite a bit of deep criticism, if we want to use that word. not only does it go into kind of a survey of several of the issues as I bring up new evidence, but I also drilled really deep in a few areas. And some people might think, wow, this chapter is long and it's got some weeds in it. But in the process, it reveals things that no one has ever realized before that are kind of like in hindsight, oh, I can't believe I didn't put that together. And I hope that shows people that I do have some bona fides when it comes to deep research. My chemistry research, I've published in the top chemistry journals, many articles, and all of them have been lauded. So hopefully people will think that I'm an honest person. I'm not trying to scam them. And I'm not just trying to make a couple of $100 or $1,000 off of a book. No, I have a loftier, hopefully more laudable purpose that people will see. But Oh, and I just have to tell you one more thing about Belmont, Massachusetts, living there. My favorite calling in the world was to be the primary chorister, which I was for about 8 months while I was in Belmont. And I was also the Sunbeam teacher of David Bakaboy's daughter, actually, and others. And I absolutely loved bearing my testimony to children through song and integrating into the program the things that the primary president, who was just a wonderful lady, I feel like she had revelation. She had a connection that other people, including her husband, who had been a bishop, who was a wonderful person, who was my bishop for a time, but like there is something wonderful about how women can lead that and they are only allowed to do it essentially in primary and maybe Young Women's Relief Society, but then always under some kind of a thumb or some. But in Belmont, I saw what it was like for women to actually lead with full power and to be a man taking direction every week or every other week on how I should be bearing my testimony through song and integrating into sharing time. I realized this church needs to have a different structure. And that was one of the first cracks, actually, that made me realize this patriarchy is not Christ's church. If the voices of the most powerful, intelligent, best capable people to raising children are not able to have the same power that a man has, and that was a little bit of a shock. Like, how could that be the beginning of my crumbling of a testimony? I'm so cerebral. I'm a chemist. Surely the disintegration of my faith would come from something else. But when I look back, I see that as being like a very powerful emotional experience that I had. And I recognize that people are going to have emotional experiences as they read the book. And I want to honor your experience. And I think that I'm writing it in that way. So that there's not a lot of gotcha stuff. There's not a lot of, see, the brethren were lying. That's what they were doing. Because although that was fun for a while, 7 or 8 years ago when I was, busy on the beginnings of social media and Mormon boards, I really do think that that there's a better way, and that we have to show how to argue more carefully, more methodically. And so I'm really looking forward to the dialogue. You were saying that maybe this is kind of a teaser so that you can understand the book, and I won't give away too many spoilers because you're probably going to want to have that experience when you're in the book, because that's my favorite way to have these epiphanies. And so maybe I'll give a few spoilers, but I'll disclose them so that you can know, maybe jump ahead, because I want you to have that experience, because that's
Right.
the funnest way to learn.
Yeah, no, and there's been so much interest. As soon as these posts popped up and then kind of disappeared and then popped up again. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit, but a lot of other podcasters were all kind of buzzing, saying, who's going to read this first? What does anyone think? We want this to get into some really scholarly hands so they can help us dissect it, because there is a lot there. And we appreciate you sharing your credential, because we find sometimes in the apologist circle, people aren't necessarily forthcoming. They'll say, I'm a researcher writer. What does that mean exactly? And I'm not saying that experience can't be credential. It can, but it's important to let people understand the point of view that you're coming from. So I really appreciate you taking time to share your background. And I don't know if you want to explain you and your brother a little bit, because I do feel like our listeners and viewers are going to go, I know that guy looks familiar, and that speaks to who you are and other reasons why you might have embarked on this incredible project.
Yeah. It did. I started the project long before I went public. I made a few major discoveries starting in 2016, but I wanted to be careful and I wanted to get more data. And I didn't want to just rush to say, well, what about this? I really feel like a problem that exists in the Mormon History Association world, with perfectly well-intended people, is they get a new tidbit, they rush, and then it kind of doesn't get incorporated into a big picture. You know, like a jigsaw puzzle, you get a few pieces wrong and you really can't finish the puzzle. And if you really can't understand which pieces need to be taken out so that other pieces can be put in, you kind of stagnate at a point. And I really wanted to hold off. So this has been an 8-year project because I wanted to get as much, triangulation around the issues as possible. But I'm, of course, very open to all kinds of feedback. In fact, on the website, there is a place where people can give me feedback and I will see it immediately. And will, of course, incorporate whatever I can into this edition or into other editions, especially if I've made a mistake anywhere, not just typos. So please engage with me. I would be happy to engage with you. It's a two-way street and it's a communication, and I'm always going to be open. So when it comes to my brother and what happened, well, the fast high-level backstory I'm sure most people here know is that that Mormon Church created a moral dilemma for my twin brother David Nielsen, because he saw that the church, in his words, were doing illegal activities. They had a supporting organization in Ensign Peak Advisors that was a separate legal entity, a 501c3, that wasn't doing any supporting. It wasn't an active charitable organization. And yet they had made attestations to the IRS that they were an active charitable organization. And they weren't telling the truth about where the money for the City Creek Mall was coming from. And they lied about how they shored up the Beneficial Financial Group, the parent company holding Beneficial Life, which of course is itself a company underneath Deseret Management Corporation. And there was a $600 million bailout that happened during the financial crisis of 2009. Where did that money come from? Did they tell the truth about that? Where did the money ultimately come from? Why didn't they tell the truth about that? Disclosures were required to be made. They were not made. And then the way that they framed it to the public had duplicity. It had deception. I've called out those individuals. I don't need to do that again and by name. Those videos are out there. People know about the story. And it really pricked David's conscience. He couldn't be silent. And so he decided that he would talk to me. I'm his twin brother. And for many years, I think we were closer than most human beings can be close to another person. And he is a man of integrity. And he has a beautiful mind. He thinks very well. He cares deeply. He's a wonderful friend and a great father. And he needed to talk to somebody about it. And so he talked to me about it. And he knew that in talking to me about it, there could be a question as to whether or not he should, because I wasn't an employee of Ensign Peak Advisors. And he asked for my thoughts. And, there was a time where he really wanted to continue working. And the Washington Post reported this. People sometimes forget about it, but that he wanted to continue working for Ensign Peak Advisors as long as he could, because he felt, like many Mormons feel, that I could try to be the change from within. I could set the example, and who would know, 20, 30 years from now, David could be the CEO of literally the largest charity in the world. And, you think back to things like patriarchal blessings and how my life is structured and what's led me to this point. It's very believable that David, and he had the chops, man, the guy is super smart. Also with the MBA, he had the ability to lead the church in truth and righteousness. And for many years, that was his goal on the charitable front. But then in learning that the Ensign Peak Advisors wasn't actually what it said it wasn't to the senior apostles what they said it was. They hid from people like Boyd K. Packer the truth of the size and the nature of the fund. The junior apostles didn't know anything about it. Even when Elder Bednar spoke about it publicly, I don't think he really understood the size of it. He said $100 million when he should have said $100 billion. And someone like him shouldn't be making those kinds of mistakes. We all get nervous sometimes when we're on microphone. And if I make similar blunders or Freudian slips or whatever today, please excuse me. We have to give everybody graces.
Yes,
But
we do.
come on, the senior apostles, the junior apostles, they should have known, and they should have known better. And the details, I can't speak about too much anymore beyond what is already out there, except to say that I am a special witness on at least one case that is ongoing, and so I can't divulge things.
Right.
So I won't be talking about it.
No.
But what I will say is that everything that I reported in that 77-page PDF that a lot of people have said, I wrote every word. David created some parts of some figures. I created, I think, most of them, except for things that were pulled right out of Ensign Peak Advisors. But it was a collaborative project. It was a joyful project, actually. For about 3 months, it was a full-time effort. And it was horrendous. It was joyful for me. It was heart-wrenching for Dave, because how do you understand whether or not someone would perceive my actions as a betrayal or as a moral imperative? And the church's moral dilemma, like I was saying, fell onto David. And then so it cascaded onto him. And then his moral dilemma cascaded onto me. And then in other ways, my moral dilemma cascaded onto other people. And now 6 or 7 layers deep, you have families that are breaking themselves up over this. And I knew that that was going to happen. And I didn't want that to happen. But yet, where is my allegiance and my responsibility? Well, there are millions of people that I don't know. Should I have allegiance to them? Well, maybe a little bit. And then you multiply it by not just 10, 100, 300 million Americans who are paying tithing, or I'm sorry, who are paying taxes that the Mormon church should have been paying.
Yep.
And people don't even realize how significant that is. Do I have a duty to my fellow man, or do I have a duty only to my family members? Do I have a duty only to my race? No, of course not. You have a duty beyond your race. But do I have a duty beyond my family? Of course you do. But most people can't comprehend that. They don't want to go there, because the idea of ripping apart a family relationship so that you can speak truth to people that you're not related to it seems like a betrayal. But that doesn't mean that I betrayed Dave. I didn't. I think in his heart of hearts, he knows that I didn't. But I hope that you will think that I have at least some credibility in writing this book, based on the fact that everything that I have said publicly about the leak and about Ensign Peak's activity and other things has been validated by reporters, has been validated by the courts, and it's all working itself out with due process. Unfortunately, that's painfully slow, but be patient. More truth is coming. It will be satisfying and it will be heartbreaking, but we can't accelerate things much faster than they are without doing things that I think are morally questionable. I pushed the moral imperative, I think, to my limit, and I hope that that's far enough for the average reader. We'll have to see what you think when you're done with the book.
Yeah, transparency comes at a cost, for sure, for the person who is blowing the whistle, as they say, and for everybody that becomes aware of what's happening. You're absolutely right. And so, yeah, that background is really interesting. And now you're back. Here you are.
Same problem, same moral imperative.
Same
Do
problem,
I
same
blow
moral-
up people's testimonies in the pursuit of truth? And what's your obligation? Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, truth sets you free, but it does a lot of other things first.
Yes.
You have to kind of
That's a great
juggle.
quote.
Yeah, it does a lot of other things first. I think I got sunburned in all of this, but most of that is healed, and I'm just grateful to be able to share what I can. Elder Uchtdorf said, "You lift where you stand," and I will say, you write where you can. And this is the place where I have been writing for the last very many years. COVID made it interesting because it actually opened up a lot of databases that universities were not, you were required to go on site in order to see certain things, microfilm, and they couldn't let research go to a complete standstill. So in some sense, a lot of this book is a couple of years earlier than it would have been if COVID hadn't happened. So silver linings, mixed blessings. You can hear in my voice, COVID has not been good to me. I've had it twice now, and both times were ravaging. Fortunately, I wasn't hospitalized, but you can still hear it in my voice, and I hope that I get my normal voice back. But silver linings, right? So there's a lot that's new in the book. I'll throw out a couple of fun teaser things. This is the back of the book. And that trigger warning that Landon read earlier is up here at the top. There's a nice little abstract. I call it an abstract because I want people to know, like, I'm a scientist at heart, and there is that's kind of the tone of the book. And then a little bit about me. Up here in the middle, you probably can't see it. Go get a book so you can see it more easily yourself.
But everybody pause the video right now and go order. This is on Amazon. This is everywhere.
Yes, thank you. It's on Barnes & Noble. It's on Kindle. It's on iBook. It's on Kobo. You can get hardcover on Amazon, and this week it will be available on hardcover from Barnes & Noble, but the paperback is in both places. And if you do Amazon Prime, you get it in 2 days. So it shouldn't be too long. And if you get it electronically, it's instantaneous. And some people have criticized my price points. I've tried to provide several price points for people so that it's relatively accessible. There's the hardcover and the paperback, but the ebook is only $9.99 or $9.95. So it shouldn't be a tax on many people.
And feel free to read anything that you want to. If you want to read the abstract, just however you want to present, you can read anything. And then when you're ready, you can pull up your website, which is incredible. So yes, continue.
Right. Okay. A lot of this you can see on the website, so I'm not going to read it right now, but what I wanted to point out is that here, this is a long-lost manuscript of Solomon Spaulding that I think virtually no Mormon historian, except for maybe Dale Broadhurst, I know Dale Broadhurst knows about it, that hardly anyone knows about. I went to the Library of Congress and found a book called The Romance of Celeste that was written by Solomon Spaulding. It's verified, and I had it professionally photographed, all 400 pages of it. And what's really fun is that there are a lot of things in that manuscript that parallel the Oberlin manuscript, that which sometimes people call manuscript story or manuscript found. It's been studied by a lot of scholars, probably not deeply enough. I hope that chapter 13 corrects that for some people. Also, Solomon Spaulding, that book. So here, if you could read, it says the real Urim and Thummim. And in the book, he talks about how an angel, Florence, takes him on a journey, on an ecstatic journey through the heavens. And he goes from Earth through the solar system, past Mercury and Venus, and then the sun, kind of like the Tycho Brahe model of the universe. And he goes to Jupiter, being led by this angel, Florence. And it's just a fascinating tale. But in it, he says that his journey is in search of the real Urim and Thummim. So here you have a candidate author of the Book of Mormon, Solomon Spaulding, talking about the Urim and Thummim and what the real Urim and Thummim is long before anyone else is on the scene, before Sidney Rigdon, before Joseph Smith. And so what is in the Romance of Celeste? Why is it that nobody knows about it? How is it that no Mormon historian or Mormon, obviously Mormon apologists aren't going to do it, but non-Mormon historians? Why have none of them gone and found this? I was able to find it. Why couldn't they?
How did you come across it? How did you, because of course we've all heard of, the manuscript, the missing manuscript, the connection, possibly, to Sidney Rigdon, but how did you find this other document from Solomon Spaulding?
Yeah. So I glancingly go through that in the book. Of course, I've got my network, right, of historians, some of them Mormon, some of them non-Mormon, some of whom are very upset about what's happening because they're going to see how this is going to unravel, and there's really nothing that they can do to stop it. It's a train, and the train is on full throttle. But in this network, for years, I would have Sunday morning meetings with people, and we would read stuff to each other, show each other what we found, and in some of that, some of the work that Matthew Jockers and Craig Criddle did, and Jeff Uleman did, and Gary McAllister did, involved using nearest sunken centroid methodology to do authorship attribution profiles for the candidate authors of the Book of Mormon, and looking at other texts that these candidate authors may have written that were not generally known about. And in that process, came across some work that Dale Broadhurst had done, who is a prince of a man. He's in Hawaii right now. I spoke with him earlier this week. He has my book, and he figured it out actually many years ago that Solomon Spaulding had written something else. And I don't know if he personally went to the Library of Congress, but he has a number of pages of it, not very much, that he found and that he translated or that he transcribed. But the whole work he never had access to that I know of. And it's never been transcribed. And I was like, well, that is a missing link right there. So boom, gonna go for that. So I got it, and I didn't, you pay for all of the professional photography, and then you start transcribing it, and you see phrases and constructions that are in that book that are clearly in the Book of Mormon and that are in the Oberlin manuscript. And so it's so satisfying to then start to see how things triangulate and how it resurrects in some sense the Spaulding/Spaulding-Rigdon theory, and really causes you to question, how have we been thinking wrongly about the sole authorship theory? What needs to be revised? But that's not the beginning of my journey. The beginning of my journey actually happened, I want to say in 2015. I was really curious about where the word Mormon came from. And of course, we all know that Joseph Smith's explanation about more good doesn't hold any water. But where did it come from? And I thought, I've never seen a survey of that where some historian has gone through everything through history and every instance of the word Mormon, and to see whether or not there could be a link or a parallel. We all hate the word parallelomania, but sometimes that's where you have to start, and to see if there's anything there. And so I started looking, and I found some interesting articles that dated all the way back to the 1630s, or I found some sources that quote things that go all the way back to the 1630s to a Jesuit priest in France whose name was Pierre de Monmort. And sometimes it was spelled Montmaur, which is often spelled today. In other places, it was spelled Monmor. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. And as I studied it further, I realized that the connection between this Pierre de Monmort and the word Mormon is that this guy was a Jesuit who made up sources. He was a professor of Oriental languages at the University of Paris. He studied Greek, and he studied what now we would call chiasms. And arguably, the Jesuits of his time period were the discoverers in the modern era of chiasms. And he was lambasted by his peers for toying with onomastics, meaning where proper nouns come from, and playing with acrostics all day long. And I quote these things in the book. And so he would take words and shuffle up their letters and make up characters and make up sources and say, and he would create literary forms that nowadays you would recognize as things like chiasms, like poetry and stuff, that had Hebraisms in it. And I was like, that's just weird. That's too much. Like, what is going on with him?
What a connection.
And then you go deeper, and this is an entire chapter in the book, which is fun. A man named Guy Ménage, who is a really great author, started in the pamphlet wars to write burlesque novels about him. And then after his novel came another one, and then another one, because he was ousted by the Jesuit order. He was defrocked, he was excommunicated. And he lost his position at the University of Paris, and he became something of a hiss and a byword among the linguists of his time. And we see that over the next 100 years, scholars would refer to him as a parasite. And that is because after Guy Ménage wrote his book, a man named Adrien Valois wrote another parody and a burlesque novel of his life. And there was a pamphlet war and lots of things. It's like political cartoons everywhere in France. Among the literary elite, this was like the most fun that people could have, because this guy was rich, came from a super amazing family, benefices and titles of the king. He was appointed to the treasury. It was like the biggest public figure who was being denounced for making up his sources. And then a guy named François Dulamoute Louvayer wrote a third burlesque of his life. and it was called L'Upar the Mormon Histoire Comique, which means Mormon the Parasite, a comic history. And you can read it today. I provide links in the book so that you can get it immediately, and written in French. It's never been translated into English, but many scholars have studied it. The main character in the book is a man named Mormon.
So he transposed the syllables
Yes.
of the word
Yep.
from
Exactly.
Monmor to Mormon, which is kind of also a play on, it sounded like what Mormon himself was doing.
That's what he was doing. And
Interesting.
that's some of what happens in the book. So these
Oh.
writers, these French writers of this time period are incredibly intelligent, and they are layered in the way that they would make fun of people because they didn't want to bring political and litigious pressure onto themselves. So by switching the syllables from Monmor to Mormon, we could always plausibly, deniably say, oh, it's just a fiction, right?
So you're saying instead of meaning more good, as Joseph Smith said, it actually perhaps means inventing something fraudulently and trying to pass it off on people.
That never existed. Exactly.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah. And in fact, there was a man named Thomas Boyes who was a professor of Oriental languages, which meant something different in those days. Oriental languages used to mean, in the day of Pierre de Monmort and Athanasius Kircher, Aramaic and Chaldean and Egyptian and Greek and Syriac and Assyrian and other languages. And those are the languages that Pierre de Monmort and Athanasius Kircher studied. Well, when this Thomas Boyes, another professor who specialized in Greek, and so he was a scholar on Pierre de Monmort, was asked in a newspaper or a magazine, actually, does anybody know where the word Mormon comes from? And he responded 6 months later in this beautiful article that wasn't digitized until just a few years ago. And it dropped my jaw to the floor when I found it, because I was searching everywhere in all of these databases. But some newspapers and magazines from the 1850s, for example, and earlier, still only exist on microfilm, if they exist in microfilm at all. So there is a wealth of information out there that still is to be gotten. Anyways, he really dove in and said, well, where does the word Mormon come from? And he talks about it in this article, that Mormon comes from Monmor, and that even in the 1650s, the word Mormon was a Monmorism and came to be the equivalent of a pun, because this guy was an inveterate punster, and he was always switching things and syllables and playing with acrostics. And so his own name, Mormon, became a synonym for a pun in Paris. And it was that way for decades. And people don't know that. And I think people should know that. But, one interesting tidbit that shines a light on something is not a trend. It's not a pattern. It's not a theme. You need a lot more than that before you can write a book and say, I've got an idea. But this was, to answer the question from a while ago, is where did this all start? It was me really wanting to understand where the word Mormon might have come from. And so then I started looking for other proper nouns in the Book of Mormon that might also have a history somewhere. And it turns out that a very close contemporary of Pierre de Monmort was Athanasius Kircher, who was a German Jesuit priest as opposed to a French Jesuit priest, but he was stationed in Rome at Collegio Romano and corresponded and traveled to France quite often. And it turns out that he made up a source, and his name is Nephi. And that starts to be a little bit too much of a coincidence to just say, oh, well, I'll put that on my shelf. That's interesting. So why is it that you have two Jesuit priests from the same decade making up sources, getting caught, and the sources that they made up, Nephi, and then the character based on Monmor, Mormon, both showing up in the Book of Mormon, not just randomly in the Book of Mormon, but as the titular and book-ending characters in the Book of Mormon? It starts with, and I, Nephi. So you would think that whoever wrote the Book of Mormon, if it wasn't a divine revelation or some ancient, or that the authors weren't of ancient origin, if it was written in the modern day, Why were those two names picked for the first and last characters of the book? And as the abridger and narrator of the book, right? Something is going on there that warrants some attention. So I start doing a deep dive into Athanasius Kircher. Now would be a good time, probably, for me to share my screen so that you can see what Athanasius Kircher looks like. Tell me, is it up?
Yep, it's up. And I want to tell everybody, I've been playing around in this website. There is a lot here. It's really interesting. Everybody make sure you take a look, and we're going to go through it here, but after look through this, there's a lot of really interesting stuff.
Yeah. So the name of the website, if I say okay here, maybe you can see it better. How the Book of Mormon Came to Pass. It's the name of the book. It's the name of the website, www.howthebookofmormoncameTopass.com. And I'm just going to ask everyone to go to it right now through this presentation, because there are things like this video that is a teaser video. If you haven't seen it, you're going to want to see it. We're going to talk about it, and it doesn't make sense for me to show that video to everyone. So just go to the website, pause this right now, watch it, and then resume, and we'll talk about what was said there. But at the banner across the top, you see Athanasius Kircher here in the upper left. This here is Pierre de Monmort. This is a picture of him that was in a frontispiece of a book written by Sallingaw. This right here is Professor John Smith, who was Joseph Smith's second cousin, twice removed, was the first professor of Dartmouth College, long before it became Dartmouth University. He was a professor of Oriental languages, and that was his official title. And he plays a very interesting role because he was the professor and tutor of the college during the time that Solomon Spaulding was both an undergraduate and a graduate student between 1781 and 1787. He got his undergraduate degree in 1785 and then stayed on to do graduate work, and then eventually became a Dartmouth missionary. Most people don't know that the purpose of Dartmouth College, I talk about the charter and the way where it comes from, the mandate of the college was, and who was involved, and Eleazar Wheelock, and how it relates to Samson Occam. And there's a lot of phraseology and scriptures that are in the Book of Mormon. And you see, now that we understand, and I'll get deeper into the connection of why Professor John Smith was influenced as a professor of Oriental languages by these two other professors of Oriental languages, Athanasius Kircher and Pierre de Monmort. He teaches Solomon Spaulding, and they are close kindred spirits, and he gives him a perusal of his manuscript because while he was sick, he wrote a fiction. And he didn't finish the fiction, but he got it pretty far. And I, in my research, went to the basement of yet another university and went through their microfilm and found an article that was written in the Cleveland Plain Dealer that an investigative journalist now I think it's 1874 in the book, you find that he, in his investigations, concluded that Professor John Smith was the original writer of the Book of Mormon, and that he probably didn't want to call it the Book of Mormon. We're not sure of what he intended to call it. We don't know what his title would have been, but that he gave the manuscript to Solomon Spaulding because he feared that it would, if he were to publish a fiction as the first professor of Dartmouth College, it might interfere with his reputation as a purely theological writer, right? Things were different back then. You know, in academia, people write fiction all the time, and people don't say, oh, well, that would have contaminated your, but you have to remember, this is very early, not quite colonial America. The American Revolution had happened by the time that Solomon Spaulding graduated from Dartmouth College. But I'm just letting you know what the time period was like. And he just felt like, I don't really want to publish something that someone could say it would taint my other works and my lectures. Now, Professor John Smith was an amazing man, and he was so intelligent. I've read all of his lectures. It turns out that some professors at BYU, so when I was going through the archives at Dartmouth University and coming across things, I found that some professors at BYU a few years earlier had also pulled those same files. And I was like, how come nobody's talked about this? Why is no one publishing anything about this? And later on, I found out that some emails were written between those professors and people like Rick Behrens, who's written several articles that many of us know about, Dartmouth Arminianism, such a tough twisted word, I'm not sure why. And now I'm reading these emails from professors at BYU who were studying John Smith, and they decided to can the project because they felt like the connection between they were hoping that the connection between Professor John Smith, being a second cousin twice removed of Joseph Smith, who was not too far away, might bolster the sole authorship hypothesis, because maybe in a way God was using Professor John Smith as an Elias, as a preparer, as a restorer, someone to prepare the way for someone greater in the line of Smiths. And they really worked on that hypothesis and hoped that they would get a Mormon History Association award for that. And I talk about that also.
And what year was this that they were
they decided to, what?
What year was this that they were sending the emails back and forth?
I don't have the exact year, but it must have been
ish.
Yeah, I'm going to say 2017-ish.
Okay. Oh, really?
Wow.
But I can look up the emails. I'm not going to look up the emails now.
No. So they were hoping to find that connection as a preparatory. They love to use that word. And of course, there's the Hiram connection too. Wow. Right. Interesting. But then they scrapped it. Huh.
They scrapped it. And you're like, well, why? Why not talk about this? I think this could be interesting to people. Well, I think I know the reason why, and hopefully we'll get to that. But I'm not going to give away everything today.
Yeah, do not give away. You're just piquing my interest so much. I have to keep it. Everybody, I have ordered this book. It's supposed to be here like any minute. I'm listening for the Amazon truck, so if I get up and leave, that's where I've gone. But Landon has started to dig in, and just so many questions. So yeah, I know it's very tempting for us to want you to answer everything. But yeah, you're right. This is just a preview.
But John Smith was a beautiful man. And when you read him and you read his letters, he Athanasius Kircher was a part of what they called the Republic of Letters. He was a spanner node between probably the two biggest and most important social networks in the world in the 1630s to 1670s. And that was the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit network, and the Republic of Letters, which is kind of the more secular version across Europe. And he would send out, Athanasius Kircher, missionaries across the world, and they would send back things to him in letters, and then he would compile it and then write books about it, and then send those books out to people and then on the condition that they would then bring him more information. So he was just this like beautiful, quintessential influencer of his century and became quite a famous man. And we'll get more into him a little bit later. But Professor John Smith studied Athanasius Kircher, and so did Solomon Spaulding. And so this is the theory that I develop in the book, and I think substantiate it quite nicely, that Professor Smith wanted to write a novel that in some ways had little clues to people that it was actually a fiction overall. His main job description was to be the linguist who assembled the family tree of the Native Americans. Because genetics wasn't a real discipline back then. Archaeology wasn't even a word that had been invented. The Oxford English Dictionary didn't put it in there until 1834. You don't understand the family tree of the entire human race without comparative linguistics. And that was his job, to understand where all the different tribes in North and South America came from. And he thought to himself, what would Athanasius Kircher write if he were alive today? What did he do in his own life? Well, he wrote many books, 44 in his life, and several of them deal with reconstructing the family tree of humanity through comparative linguistics. And we'll get to that with the figures in a minute. So Professor Smith thought it fun to write his own fiction of where the Native Americans really came from, and to throw in all these Kircherisms and Monmorisms into it as clever clues for the intellectual elite of his day, that it was all just fiction after all. He died. Solomon Spaulding took the manuscript, finished it, and made something wonderful and recited it to members of his towns in Conneaut, Ohio, and Amity, Pennsylvania, such that those people would remember him fondly as Old Come to Pass, and it would get printed that way in newspapers because he used the phrase so many times in his writings. And he talks about the real Urim and Thummim. And he was a very educated person. When he was done with Dartmouth, he spent 10 years as a Dartmouth missionary going to the Oneida tribe, going to the Rama tribe. These names should ring some bells. They're proper nouns that exist in the Book of Mormon. And the word Toronto in its original tongue means the narrows. And he meant that to be the narrow neck of land that separates the two Great Lakes on either side of it, Erie and Ontario. And so I go through all of these connections. It all makes sense if you understand who Professor John Smith was, who Solomon Spalding was, what their education was, what they knew about Athanasius Kircher and Pierre de Monmort. People have unfortunately been looking in the wrong places, and most importantly, in the wrong generation, to understand the true story of where the Book of Mormon came from, how the Book of Mormon came to pass. There are lots of theories that are attached to Spalding theories, like Spalding-Rigdon theories.
Mm-hmm.
Did he get the manuscript somehow after Spalding died? Maybe from a bookshop because or maybe he stole it from the bookshop and he's an evil, terrible person. Maybe there are some more innocent circumstances with which he got it. I address all of those sub-theories in the book, I think very adequately, and pave a path so that people can say, so that I can assert, this is what I think the true story is of how it happened. Now, it's not going to be perfect. Nothing is, especially when a new theory comes upon the scene. I am sure that better research will come by and tweak some of the things that I got wrong. And I will eat my humble pie as soon as that happens, no problem. I'm inviting everyone to dig in as deeply as possible, especially Mormon historians and non-historians. Although maybe give a couple of other people a chance to start first, because I think we've been a little underserved by what you have provided for us on this topic. So maybe think about strengthening and steel manning arguments before you attack them or dismiss them outright. That is kind of the scholarly way, and I'm afraid that Mormon apologists and some Mormon historians are going to immediately put in the rejection engine on this before trying to understand it. And that will be unfortunate, but I think that in the end, if they do that, that will be a disservice unto themselves. So all of this was to explain the banner at the top of the website. When going from left to right, there's a story that connects Athanasius Kircher to Joseph Smith. So now going down a little bit, I provided a teaser video. It's started to circulate a little bit on TikTok, but I really wanted it to get out to this kind of a community first, because those Mormon book loving readers, man, you're my kin, and I want you to have this first. So that's why we're doing it first. But pause, watch the video, and then afterwards realize that if you want to read the first 20 of the pages of the book, there's a peek inside right here. I'm giving it away to you for free. And that entails a lot of the backstory of Athanasius Kircher, which is just super fun, which we'll see in the figures in a minute. You can read the back cover of the book that I was just showing you. There's the trigger warning, right? So you don't have to buy being an unprepared buyer. I'm trying to help you be ready for it, and I think you'll love it. All the figures in the book are freely accessed here for everyone at any time. And that can actually be helpful if you decide that as you're reading the book or as you're on your ebook and you don't like to click on the links and wait, you can have another screen available and you can go through it all right there back and forth and save time and be more efficient. I had you in mind while creating the website and while writing the book. There are some fun reviews that I have at the bottom of the website, which maybe we'll see. Some supporting information, a lot of places in the book. For example, the story in French Wikipedia of Pierre de Monmort I decided not to include in the book, but I translated it from French into English, and I include that in the supporting information. Because I got COVID again, I'm a little behind schedule, so bear with me. I'm still working on making it so it's going to be a living document. I'm going to be adding things and changing about it continuously. It's not like static and locked down like the book is. So be patient with me. And then there's the endnotes and the index here so that everyone can see. And the vast majority of all of my references, I went out and found free, no problem links that go to archive.org, that reference other pages, so that you can just in one click just go and see. You might not be able to get as deep into the book. You might have to buy the book or whatever, but I'm being compliant with laws here and giving you what is in the public domain, but I'm making it fast and easy. If you're reading along in the book and you're like, where did that come from? And you look at the footnote and you wish, gosh, that database seems pretty esoteric. How am I going to get into that? I give you the link and the access so that you can see it fast. So I hope that you appreciate that. You can see in just me scrolling through it, I was exhaustive. I'm obviously going to get a lot of criticism from people who say, well, you should have put this source in, you should have put that source in. And I'm sorry I couldn't do everything. And the book is 390 pages and I decided not to make it 600. So if you're
not a D. Michael Quinn.
I
not going to
love
do
D.
that.
Michael Quinn, but it is hard for me when I read
ponderous. No, this is more accessible for sure.
But yeah. And you want me to put more sources in? Tell me, I'll show you where on the website you can give me that feedback. I'll add it to the errata if I made a mistake. I'll add it to extra notes and sources so that people in the community can have them. If you think there's a valuable source, it'll go in here. Everyone will have it. It's totally transparent. And then the index in the back of the book, you don't get in the ebook because the page numbers, the reflowable format, page numbers don't really work that way. But I wanted everyone to have it, whether you bought the hard copy or not. And so you can see the types of terms and where in the book they appear. And that will be, hopefully helpful to some.
Well, you certainly know your audience because as you know, post-Mormons will always say, show me the source.
Show me the source. That's right. That's it. Yeah, I kind of got lost on I guess it would have been the figures. Some of those pictures were just mesmerizing and definitely made me want to figure.
Going.
Yeah.
So if you click the buy now button, it just scrolls you down here just a couple of inches. If you click the view figures, you go to the section beyond that on the website. But let's just talk really quickly about the products that are out there. Hardcover at Amazon, paperback with Amazon, again, delivers with Prime in less than 3 days. You can get the audiobook I'm still working on. It's about halfway done. I might decide to release it as a podcast. It would be a paid podcast because I have to recuperate some of the years that I went without a salary to be able to bring this to this community. So I apologize. Some people have criticized that I shouldn't be putting this kind of information behind a paywall. Well, some people could criticize Richard Bushman for putting his book behind a paywall. I'm doing the best that I can. I'm living within my means, and I am trying to make this as affordable and accessible to all of you. The Kindle, the Apple iBook, Barnes & Nobles, I said that the hardcover is coming this upcoming week. Some people like different versions of hardcovers, so I'm trying to be thoughtful about that. Kobo, and of course with Nook, also as an ebook. I am not yet able to accommodate bulk orders. You can buy in bulk from Amazon if you want, or autographed copies, but I'm working on that. We'll get there if that's what people want. I'll make it happen. Now, here are some of the figures from the book. Here's Athanasius Kircher. If you click on any of these, I provide very high resolution photos as well as the captions that are in the book. So you can really get a sense of things before buying, but also when you're reading the book, if you want to spend more time with this and not have to go back to maybe 3 pages ago, you said figure 35, you're talking about again, do I have to click the link again? Do I have to go back? You can just look at it here. And that makes a more enjoyable reading experience without so much back and forth. This is the Collegio Romano. Is this big enough or should I click on the thumbnail? Is this okay?
Yeah, it's good. If you want to highlight some of them, you can click on it and we get a close up of it. But I mean, you can just get lost in this for hours. There's some amazing engravings.
This is Collegio Romano. This is where Athanasius Kircher was employed as a professor of Oriental languages. While he was there, his principal job description was to, let's see if this helps, was to translate the obelisks that the Vatican had pillaged from Egypt, which were in desperate need of translation. And how did he know how to translate ancient Egyptian? Well, spoiler alert, he did not know how to translate ancient Egyptian. But what's really interesting is that he made up an intermediate language and wrote a book about it called Prodromus Coptus. And I have links for this in the book. You can see everything. It's all been digitized. Prodromus Coptus in Latin means Coptic forerunner. So what he meant to say, it's very clear from people who've studied the book, that which is all written in Latin, and so it's tough, but with artificial intelligence and machine learning, I'm learning a lot. You can read a lot of it and translate it pretty quickly. I would say about half, that's a really rough number, of everything that Athanasius Kircher ever wrote in Latin still hasn't been translated into English. Scholars have studied it, but it just hasn't been made available in book form to a lay audience. And I think that there's a gap there that maybe we can ask people at BYU to start working on, because I think there's some responsibility, which we'll get to. Anyways, he said that he could translate ancient Egyptian because he had access to a codex that was written by Rabbi Berechius Nephi. This is that source that he made up. And so he said that the reason why he had the ability that no one else had is because there was modern Coptic and there was ancient Egyptian. But somewhere halfway in between, Egyptian kind of evolved. He didn't use the word reformed Egyptian, which some people are giving me flack out on the internet for some reason. He didn't speak in English. He spoke in Latin. So of course, he didn't use the term reformed Egyptian. And he also spoke, French and German and some other languages, but he really didn't speak English. So he wouldn't have used that word. Instead, he talked about restoring. The Latin word he did use was instauratio, an intermediate Egyptian language, halfway between ancient Egyptian and hieroglyphics and modern Coptic. And he chose to call that Prodromus Coptus, or Coptic forerunner. Okay. So it's like the preparing language to understand, like, how did Coptic get where it was? It's because it evolved from ancient Egyptian to something in the middle.
But he fabricated that. That is not real.
The whole language, the book. And so let's go back to another one. So here are some of the characters that he has used in some of his books. These characters actually were written in Obeliscus Pamphilicus. I chose these figures because they're a little bit more fun, but they're the same. They're part of his Reformed Egyptian.
So he made a characters document. Oh my goodness.
Oh, not character documents, character books. And he created a system that was very internally consistent, but is totally false. But people believed him because he was so clever in being so internally consistent.
That's incredible. Did you have a question before, Landon?
Yeah, you actually called it a gale in the book, which is obviously what Joseph Smith was creating when he did the Book of Abraham. Was he's trying to create a grammar and
alphabet of the Egyptian language.
Yeah.
So I hope people don't
think very much to that. Yeah.
Right. I liken it unto it. And every once in a while as a writer, you want to say some fun phrases, but I hope people don't get the misunderstanding here. I'm not being inappropriate. If anything, I'm being a little cheeky in saying, because to Athanasius Kircher, his three principal works, we're just starting to talk about the first one, Prodromus Coptus, right now, were the three keys to decoding the Egyptian language. He came up with each one of these books in succession, like in this decade, this one, 5 or 10 years later, that book, 5 or 10 years, that book. And he kept building on it. And that's how he kept growing his reputation as the world scholar on Egyptian hieroglyphics. He sustained it with additional books. And he said that he was restoring not just ancient Egyptian language, but the full, true religious history of the planet, the whole world, in his books. And all of the hieroglyphic doctrine, Adamic magic, and even the Adamic language. He was just ambitious, and he was a little bit of a charlatan. He didn't really probably believe it, but he probably drank his own Kool-Aid or holy water, however you want to think about it, strongly enough, deeply enough that, when you have to live your lie long enough, you believe it. And maybe that there's a parallel there to what happened to Joseph Smith. Anyway, so these are some of the fun characters. This last one I talk a lot about in the book. It's the Coptic letter phi. He corrects or restores the intention of the original author, who he attributes to Hermes Trismegistus, who is a syncretic deity that's associated with Thoth. Kircher believes that he discovered the Book of Thoth. For those of you who are interested in Hermeticism and the Kabbalah, there's a lot of fun details in those disciplines in the book, because Athanasius Kircher believed in those things and was hoping to restore and reconcile Catholicism with Hermeticism, with the Kabbalah, and with the traditions of Hermes Trismegistus and the Book of Thoth, and including the Book of Enoch, which Kircher said he found and that he would translate in time, which of course he never did.
So you're basically saying it's a mix of religion and magic.
There is a lot of that. Kircher himself was a believer in magic. He had a slightly different definition than we would use today, and a different definition that Joseph Smith would have used. But it's actually kind of it's a charming definition of magic that he quotes from John Battista de Porta, and I'll leave that as a fun thing for people in the book so we don't take up too much time in some of these tangents. But it's fascinating to know that Athanasius Kircher was a believer in magic, and he believed that in restoring the true Egyptian language through this intermediate Egyptian language, that he was also restoring all the secrets of Adamic magic and Royal Arch Masonry all the way back to the pyramids and before the flood. Athanasius Kircher is he's incredible. He's amazing. A lot of people just see him as a total charlatan. Other people just revered him. You know, was he a pious fraud? Did he know what he was doing? Some interesting questions and parallels there. But a lot of scholars like Rene Descartes saw right through him and publicly was like, no, this guy is a fraud. I am not listening. I'm not reading. I am not entertaining this guy, you know, not an iota, not a jot and a tittle. And, but one of the reasons why Athanasius Kircher was so charming is that he took everything that he learned from his Jesuit missionaries, and he took all of his ideas and he turned them into what's called Baroque spectacle. He created a museum at the Collegio Romano, and dignitaries from all over the world would visit him and pay handsome sums of money to have these VIP tours. He became so famous that people called him Oedipus Egyptiacus. And here's an engraving, this is very braggadocious of him, that he put in his third book, called Oedipus Egyptiacus. His first key to deciphering the Egyptian language was Prodomus Coptus. His second was Lingua Egyptiaca Restituta, which means the restoration of the Egyptian language. And the third is called Oedipus Egyptiacus, or Egyptian Oedipus. And of course, Oedipus is the character that went to the Theban Sphinx and was able to solve the riddle that no one else could solve, and therefore didn't get devoured, but was given a gift of wisdom. And so he calls himself Oedipus Egyptiacus for having solved the riddle of the Theban Sphinx, which was in his day synonymous with solving the mystery of the hieroglyphic language. So the guy had a little bit of a pride problem at some point.
Almost like dressing up in a general's costume or something.
Yeah.
There you go.
So he translated so many obelisks, and all of them are just horribly inaccurate, of course. But here's a fun one. This is the Celian obelisk, and the actual translation is Horus, powerful bull, beloved of Mot, king of Upper and Lower Egypt, son of the sun, Ramses II. And you can read on your own what Kircher's translation was. Look at how long it is. And it's so ridiculous. He didn't understand that ancient Egyptian wasn't actually phonetic. He thought that beyond being pictographic, he thought it was more ideographic and rune-like. His methodology in approaching the hieroglyphs was that you should yourself have what he called spiritual magnetism in your heart. And then when you hold the manuscript in your hand, your spiritual magnetism powers them like runes. And from them, you will then be given divine, divinatory, and sometimes diabolic inspiration. And from that, if you're in tune with the spirit, then you can translate it. So the grammar and alphabet is not like a phonetic grammar. It's more like pieces and symbols working together to create images in your mind that are kind of like visions. And then you try to confirm those visions by repeating the experience. Okay.
Like the catalyst theory.
It is essentially the catalyst theory for how it is what Athanasius Kircher did. We know what his methods were. They were not phonetic or pictographic. But you can see how long that translation is. And that should remind you a little bit about when Joseph Smith has 6 Kinderhook plates and he holds them in his hands and he like somehow is able to translate them while holding them, not knowing what they even are, and that they were Reformed Egyptian, were they another dialect of Egyptian?
Right.
But with his spiritual magnetism, he's holding these Kinderhook plates and it unlocks a vision that he confirms to himself. And he says it would form a book of 1,200 pages if he were to translate all 6 plates. Well, whoever thinks that those kinds of characters can generate that kind of verbiage, right? Well, Athanasius Kircher did, and apparently Joseph Smith did. And that parallel doesn't imply causation necessarily, but what really did happen, we're just starting to get all the pieces in the right place so we can tell the right story. So here is Tourist Babel. This is his attempt in a different book, though he published it in 1879, the year before he died, where he tried to reconcile characters from Latin and Greek and Hebrew. He even has coins from certain places in Spain, and he looks at the symbols that are on those and tries to map them to things that Moses would have written. I mean, this guy was everywhere in his thinking.
Ambitious. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you can learn more about how he tried to reconstruct the Adamic language, because he, like so many other people, and Professor John Smith also believed this, that that the true Adamic language was corrupted during the Tower of Babel, because Nimrod was, of course, prideful in thinking that he could build his way to heaven. And then, and so pieces of the true Adamic language were fractured and scattered in all the languages of the world. And if you were really clever, you should be able to pull the pieces from every language, and reconstruct the true Adamic language. And then you would be able to speak with God as Enoch did, and Enoch and Hermes Trismegistus are syncretic patriarchs. That's what Athanasius Kircher believed. He stated it in his books. Idris, Enoch, Adris, there are lots of different spellings, was Hermes Trismegistus, and it was his goal to unlock the wisdom of the sages of the ages through reconstruction of the Adamic language. And so this is just something to whet your appetite on the process by which he did that. I told you earlier that he was given an entire wing of the Collegio Romano to for a museum. And he had obelisks on display with their fake translations. And he also had, you can kind of see on the shelving off to the side, there are a lot of these like round ball type things, maybe made of brass, maybe made of glass. Well, Jocelyn Godwin, who is my favorite Kircher expert, said, and I quote him a lot in the book because I love him, that glass globes containing pointers, spindles, and magnetized figurines represent his favorite invention, his favorite device. And I'm going to show you what a few of those things look like. Here's the next one. And this is one of the exhibits in Kircher's museum, and he called it Machina Magnetica Cryptologica, which is, of course, a magnetic cryptologic machine. And it was kind of like a magnetic telegraph. And what would happen is one person would go to one ball at the end of the exhibit, like ball A over here, and you would turn the ball so that the pointer inside, which is a man, who is holding a spindle, and that spindle is pointed towards a letter that's written on the sides of the ball, which was made of glass and brass. And in the process, you would turn the ball to a letter, and then hidden pulleys underneath would transfer that information to the person on the other end of the exhibit, ball E. And then it would be like a way of like spelling out Rebecca Biblioteca to someone on the other side of the exhibit. And because there were hidden magnets underneath these balls, that as you would turn one ball, it would cause the others to turn. As an onlooker, it would seem like the spiritual magnetism of your hands. I should also say that Athanasius Kircher wrote his PhD thesis on spiritual magnetism. And that's how he got his Sacrae Theologiae Doctor, his STD. It's kind of an interesting post-nominal.
Interesting.
Yes, that's
A
what
lot
they
of people
called it.
go to college for those.
Yeah, he went to college to get an STD. Oh, it was the highest honor of the pontifical system to get an STD. And it turns out that Professor John Smith, when he got his doctorate from Brown University, he, 1803, I think, rather than take on the post-nominal DD, which was common at the time for Doctor Divinitatis, he decided, and in the title pages of his books, no less, to call himself Professor John Smith, comma, STD. Now that's really interesting because that wasn't the degree that he was being given. But remember, he is this beautiful antiquarian who fancied himself as living in the Republic of Letters, being that continuation of the old days with the scholars writing letters to each other through networks and copying and forwarding and liking letters like you would do today in social media, but in this very rarefied network of professors of Oriental languages. So he takes on the post-nominal STD. And I have links in the book that prove that. Here it is. Here are his publications. You can see it for yourself and ask yourself, why did he do that? Anyways, spiritual magnetism was a big thing for Athanasius Kircher. And he even said that that is the mechanism by which the Apostle Peter was able to walk on water towards Jesus. His faith was so high that it charged up his spiritual magnetism inside of him, which allowed him his own spiritually magnetic field to repel the magnetic field of the earth so that he could levitate as if walking on water. You're like, wow, these are fun ideas. This guy was into it. So anyways, if you were to go to one end of the exhibit and spell Landon or Rebecca Biblioteca, it would feel like your hands touching that first ball and turning it would communicate spiritually, ethereally to the next ball, which the pointer and spindle would rotate and spin. And then that would cause the next one to rotate and spin and the next one. And then it would turn out right in the end that if the other person were spiritually, magnetically aligned with God, then you could communicate one with another from one side of the exhibit to the other. Just fascinating. And people paid handsomely to go to this museum and to experience these exhibits. And I've got lots of them in the book, and I go into them in depth. So we don't have to go into tremendous depth here, other than to show the consistency, the pattern. One data point is not necessarily a trend, but I'm giving you a lot of data points and I am connecting them. And there is a theme here, and that theme is undeniable if you are willing to take the time to really go deep into the weeds.
Yeah, these are just fascinating. And of course, you see the parallels, the curious workmanship, the brass, the compass, the answering questions, the pointing you in directions. And this was known. This was written about. Everybody knew.
Yeah. And if you're a professor of linguistics and you're like, what am I going to be like? Am I going to be like the most famous professor of linguistics of all, Athanasius Kircher, or like his French contemporary Pierre de Montmort? Or am I going to be like a truer disciple of Christ as I try to construct the true Native American history through linguistics the same way that they did? But I'm going to do it right. And that was his life goal. But that didn't mean that he couldn't have fun writing some fiction for himself. And then he gave that fiction to Solomon Spaulding, and it turned into something more. And then, of course, it turned into something more. But we can still see the vestiges. All of these Kircherisms and Monmorisms in the Book of Mormon and Dartmouthisms are collectively like snippets of DNA that get somehow passed. They might not be expressed in the cell. They might not even code for genes anymore in the cell, but they're there. And how did they get there? And they have a sequence. They have a story, and you can put the story together. And DNA forensics in crime scenes, it doesn't take much to really nail down the truth about what happened. And I would contend that these isms that I'm presenting in the book collectively make such a strong forensic case that if you try to destroy this theory without trying to understand it, then Amen to your priesthood. Amen to your scholarship. So join me in the process of unearthing the truth before you start to attack something that you don't understand. So I've said my piece to
You've said your piece. No, I feel
you know who I'm saying it to.
Yeah. Oh, yes. No, there is renewed interest, I think, in the Solomon Spalding, which of course this is sort of the precursor to, to all of that. It piggybacks with that. And of course, on Mormonism Live, they did, was it 3 or 4, Landon? Part series on,
3.
yeah, I think it was 3. So it's something that's been around, and then it's kind of fallen off the radar, and then it's come back. But this is very interesting, just in perhaps an explanation for some of the content of some of these manuscripts. Lost, of course, is the key. How do we know what's there? But to find this Solomon Spalding fiction, I'm really interested in that. I can't wait to read about that, because that's a new piece of information that you yourself have copied and read, and it exists. So,
and it is
fascinating.
It is so full of information that I have decided that I'm going to, when I'm finished with my analysis and get, a lot more literary analysis, not from Mormons, but from real literary experts, right? Because it's not about that. It's different. I'm going to publish it. It's in the public domain, so anybody could go and publish it. Hey, if anyone wants to beat me to it. But you're going to want a good commentary. You're going to want a good analysis. I don't think unless you're Dale Broadhurst, you do not know Solomon Spalding. Yeah. You don't. Anyone in the world who thinks you know who Solomon Spalding is, you do not, because you haven't read. You get to know someone by reading 400 pages of their personal novel. It turns out that Solomon Spalding was probably a closeted homosexual. Dale Broadhurst says that he was, and there are lots of indications in his text that he was. The main character, I'll just give you a fun little spoiler, in the Romance of Celeste is a character named Philander, which literally means Phil and Ander, lover of men, right? And he falls in love with this angel who I told you about earlier, takes him through an ecstatic journey through the heavens, eventually going all the way out to the stars that are fixed on the edge of the firmament itself. Very similar to kind of what's happening in the Book of Abraham, if you think about it. Oh, yeah. Well, so Florence takes him by the hand, goes on this ecstatic journey, and he falls in love with him. And it's inside of this Romance of Celeste, there's a little bit of a bromance between, and this is written, I know, in the 1800s, so taboo. And Spalding models himself onto the main character, Philander. And that is the reason why his family and descendants decided not to publish the novel, but they didn't want it to languish, so they donated it to the Library of Congress. And it just took that long for people to cataloging and digitizing and going back for it to be discoverable by people like me, who is not an expert. But if you're willing to truly spend the time, you can find these things, and there is a lot more to find. And so I would ask you to please think about supporting my research. I'll show you how you can do that on the website. Because I think we've been sold a bill of goods by some apologists and Mormon historians, not all of them. And it's time to get their truth out. And unfortunately, there is a corporation out there that has $150 billion advantage, who has a penchant for hiding things in vaults and not publishing when they could publish. And it's time for us to hold them accountable. And I'm giving you in the book the facts and the data for going and holding them accountable. There should be a petition, hopefully within the next couple of weeks, where students at BYU demand that the files that they have been hiding in the vaults finally be completely opened. And I'll show you what some of those things are, because I've been there and nobody knows what they are. But this,
hey, Lars, before we go there, can you explain, how did the manuscript get from Solomon Spalding into Joseph Smith's hands, or how did he?
Do you touch on that at all in the book, or is it just more informational up to that point? Because of course there are so many different theories around that when you talk about.
We'll just go ahead and jump right now to figure 35.
There you go.
There we go.
Yeah. So a big question that you might have is, how did all of these Kircherisms get into the text that ultimately became the Book of Mormon? And of course, all the way to the left is a theory, an umbrella theory, called what I'm calling the anti-Kircher Nephi theory. In other words, if you don't think that that Kircher's Nephi and the Book of Mormon Nephi is the same, you're anti that. So you're an anti-Kircher Nephi kind of a person. And the most people who would be anti-Kircher Nephi, I mean, nobody knows about this yet, but people are going to start putting themselves in camps, would ascribe to the ancient authorship theory, which is in this diagram, what I call AK0. All of this is well explained in the book. And that fundamental theory is that an angel named Nephi or Moroni, there's some interesting, as everybody here probably knows, about who was the original messenger. Why was the original messenger not Moroni? Why was he Nephi? Why did that story change? Well, the book fully explains that, in my opinion. But whether it's the angel Nephi or the angel Moroni that deliver some ancient text that has a lot of Kircherisms and Monmorisms and Dartmouthisms that happen to not be those things coincidentally because it's an ancient document, that's theory AK0. And of course, that golden plates got into the hands of Joseph Smith. We all know that story. Then the next two theories are AK1 and K1. These are sole authorship theories, and that's kind of what that subscriptive one means, that one person in the modern era, Joseph Smith, did all of the writing. But how did these Kircherisms get in there? Well, AK1 is a theory that says that it's all just a coincidence. Joseph Smith was just like this incredible, intuitive genius, and all of these isms just are totally coincidental. He knew a lot of Hebrew, but because he was inspired by God and he was amazing. Okay, you like that? That's your AK1. You're an anti-Kircher Nephi theorist, and you subscribe to the sole authorship theory. That's
This
fine.
is so Book of Mormonish.
It's so Book of Mormonish.
Yeah, the anti-Kircher Nephi.
I love it. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the first Kircher Nephi theory, which is that somehow Joseph Smith knew about Athanasius Kircher and Nephi and Mormon, how he got to be such an amazing scholar on something that was impossibly not well known at the time. Only by the most elite professors of the world knew. No one in rural America knew about Athanasius Kircher in those days. Go study it. I've done it. Find all the books that Joseph Smith has ever written. Find all the books that were in Palmyra. Find all the books that were, and go try to make a connection. And if you can find it to me, I'll buy you dinner. Good luck. But we can always entertain the theory and the sub-theories underneath that. Maybe Joseph Smith somehow did become an expert on Kircher and he decided to write, but why would he put those things in the Book of Mormon? Wouldn't that kind of give away his fiction or betray his scripture as fiction? Why would he do that? That doesn't seem reasonable to me. But maybe you can come up with an explanation for why he did that. That is reasonable. I touch on what some of those theories are, because remember, I had these groups that I vetted these concepts with, and we tried to strengthen that theory as much as we could. And so I try to make a good case for every theory in the book, and there's a chapter devoted to that. The next theory is K2. That's the idea that two people are involved in the Kircherism chain between Athanasius Kircher and Joseph Smith, namely in this case, Professor John Smith and Joseph Smith. Is it possible that Joseph Smith maybe, because Hiram was at Dartmouth, maybe Hiram found it in a library or in an office, or maybe they were playing hide and seek one day and they just happened upon it. Or maybe Joseph Smith stole it. Or maybe the Smith family were grave robbers and they were body snatchers, and they dug up the body of John Smith so they could sell it to Dartmouth so they could use it as cadavers because they need, and that was happening at the time. There are all kinds of weird theories that people could entertain. Well, I'm laying them all out there, what people have said, what they've thought. You can make up your own mind. You're an educated reader. You've got the resources and you've got search engines. So I'm trying to help you out. The next theory is the Smith family theory. So that's three people in the Kircherism chain, from Professor John Smith to the prophet Joseph Smith, with the Smith family being that number three, making the mnemonic work. Maybe it was Hiram Smith. Maybe it was Father Smith who made up all the stories, or Lucy Smith maybe wrote it all down. Maybe that's the reason. Maybe it was just a big family affair. Reputable historians have entertained that. Rick Barons entertained that for a while, wrote about that in some of his papers. He unfortunately didn't know anything about Athanasius Kircher. He had lots of files that he left with the archives of BYU when he died. He also left copies of those with other people. And unfortunately, BYU decided not to work on and publish those things, but there are people out there who have this information. I've seen it. It's where these emails came from. And it turns out that he was wrong about some of his Smith family theory, that it was a family affair and therefore a conspiracy, but he was wrong about other parts of it, the most crucial parts of it, unfortunately. But that's the way it is with everybody. It's the way it is with me. New theories, new knowledge. You don't get everything right just from the get-go. But Rick Barons has got a lot of wonderful stuff. I hope you'll like the stuff that I put in the book from Rick Barons. And there is a lot more coming because I'm not the owner of the Rick Barons content, boxes and boxes of stuff. And that person is going to come out with that stuff when that person wants to. And I have the deepest respect for that person. The next theory would be K4, the idea that Professor John Smith knew about these Kircherisms, taught them, shared them with Professor Spalding or with Solomon Spalding, but then somehow Joseph Smith got the manuscript from him directly, maybe because he stole it, maybe because he scried on the property of Matilda Sabine's brother-in-law's house in Onondaga at a time that might work. I mean, there are so many theories out there, right? So we just lay it out. Spoiler alert, that's not what happens. What does happen? There is a chain from Kircher to Professor John Smith to Solomon Spalding to Sidney Rigdon to Joseph Smith to his scribes. And this echoes that banner that you saw on the homepage of the website. And it's a beautiful story, and it's not a conspiracy. I've heard many Mormon podcasters say on the best Mormon podcasts, no matter how you look at it, the Spalding-Rigdon-Smith theory has to be a conspiracy. And I would just like to say it doesn't have to be. That is unfortunately a lack of creativity. Not that these people aren't creative, but you have to have an open mind. There is a way, once you understand the Kircherisms and the Monmorisms and everything else, you open your mind to a different explanation that doesn't involve Sidney Rigdon being a villain. It doesn't involve Joseph Smith being a wholehearted con man. And I'm not going to talk too much about how that happens, except to say that Sidney Rigdon is a beautiful man, and I love him. And he is the reason why Mormonism is what it is today. His thoughts, his ideas, his revelations, his prose, the things that you love most about the Book of Mormon, the plot and the stories and the intrigue and the characters and the cutting off the head and the grasping and the lady dancing to please the man before the king. All of this fun stuff is from Solomon Spalding. And all the beautiful poetry and the phraseology and men are that they might have joy, all of that is Sidney Rigdon, who, when he got Solomon Spalding's manuscript legitimately, without stealing it, looked at it and said, this is true. This, I feel it. I look at it, this is the true story of where the Native Americans came from. And they had beliefs and they had prophets, and it connects to the Book of Mormon or to the Bible and to the Tower of Babel and to Jerusalem. And he, as a minister himself, felt like God was giving him something beautiful and special. It was in the middle of the Second Great Awakening. It was a huge countrywide restoration. That is not a word that Joseph Smith made up, and it's not a word that Sidney Rigdon made up. People were talking about restoration of the truth and of ancient scripture long before either of the two of them. Read Jonathan Edwards, read George Whitefield, like all of these things and things that Thomas D'Onofrio found out, it's all in the book. But Sidney Rigdon was a beautiful man who believed that this text was true and real. And he wanted to find it, and he knew from reading it that not even 100th part of it had been translated, and that there was a cave full of golden records that had all of this scriptural truth on this non-oxidizable media so that it could be revealed in the latter day. And he was going to be a part of that, but he needed to find that buried treasure. How was he going to find it? He needed someone to, he had 5 children. He was living in Bainbridge, Ohio. He was setting up his congregation in Kirtland. He was running the United Order of Enoch on the Isaac Morley farm 3 years before Joseph Smith got the revelation that they need to restore the United Order of Enoch. I mean, come on. But Rigdon was a true believer, and he felt like he was an instrument in God's hand, and he was righteous, and he deserved it. If anybody deserved to be given ancient scripture, it was Sidney Rigdon. He was a prince of a person. He had an assistant. His assistant was Parley P. Pratt. When did that connection happen? Was it in 1825? Was it in 1826? He became his preaching assistant for several years, long before anything happened with Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon. But where did he live in 1825? In Palmyra, with his uncles Ira and Alan Pratt. And Joseph Smith had the reputation of being able to find ancient treasure. A lot of people believed him, not just Parley P. Pratt. Hundreds of people. He scammed people across the state. And he didn't always believe that it was a scam. Joseph Smith honestly believed in the magical tradition that he was brought up, because if both of your parents are deep into Mormonism, you're going to believe Mormonism. If both of your parents are deep into magic, you're going to believe magic, at least on some level. Did he have crisis of faith or crises of magic at some points? Probably. I talk about where I think those happened in his life after Alvin died, etc. But he, on some level, for a time, believed that he did have the ability to at least see treasures in the earth. And that was what he branded himself, publicized himself as being able to do. Parley P. Pratt knew that. He's an assistant to Sidney Rigdon, who after years decides to confide in him about this manuscript that he has that he believes is of ancient origin. They pray about it earnestly and decide that they're going to reach out to Joseph Smith, because maybe God, in putting Parley P. Pratt on Sidney Rigdon's path, maybe he did that because it was part of putting Joseph Smith on his path, and that we were all part of something, and that all of these things might have been foreordained and blessings predicated upon their righteousness. So now you have an explanation by which Sidney Rigdon, in honesty and sincerity, is reaching out to Joseph Smith. But he's smart. He's been ridiculed. He was excommunicated from his post as the restorationist preacher for the Redstone Baptist Association, the First Baptist Church of Pittsburgh. So he knows that he has to be careful about with whom he shares his pearls and not to cast them before swine. So he vets Joseph Smith. He tests him. And of course, Joseph Smith ultimately cons Rigdon and says, here is the plate. I found the plates. They were delivered to me by this angel Nephi, like you were saying, which later turns out to be the angel Moroni. And I talk in the book where that comes from and why, and what parts get added as afterthoughts to the Book of Mormon, including the Book of Moroni, and why, and how we can have textual evidences that Rigdon wrote those phrases instead of Spalding or someone else. And then Joseph Smith, long story made short, I think he believes that the plates are real, that they are sequestered somewhere, and that he can see them if he's righteous and he changes, but he knows that he doesn't have any spiritual magnetism. He would not have used that word. Sidney Rigdon would not have used that word, but Solomon Spalding would have used that word. And he wants it to be true. He makes plates, like Dan Vogel said. Maybe he painted them gold, maybe they were made out of copper, maybe they were made out of tin. And like Athanasius Kircher, interesting, amazingly, like a weird parallel, he believes that in pondering hieroglyphic shapes or trying to see them in your spiritual eye, it unlocks then the manuscript that he had from Sidney Rigdon, which he memorizes, which he dictates. And he does it with some earnestness, but he also does it with some duplicity because of the weird way in which he was brought up in his conditioning. And long story made short, it is not a conspiracy. There is some lying and some deceit, but not as much as everyone thinks. Joseph Smith was only 22 years old. He lost his older brother. He was trying to hold it together. He was trying to hold his family together. They lost the farm. Now he's being told by Sidney Rigdon, I think God is calling you to do something amazing. I think that if you repent of your sins and become a better person, and Joseph Smith is looking at this and being like, this man believes in me. He's got total faith in me. And he's showing me these manuscripts and wants me to find them. And I want to be a better person. And I want to repent of my sins. And I'm going to try as hard as I can. And he does. And of course, like all Mormons, we get into this cycle of believing something to be true, wanting it to be true, saying that it's true before you even have a testimony of it being true, and then it becomes true. Joseph Smith is the first Mormon to do that to himself, maybe tied with Sidney Rigdon. And this should not make you hate Joseph Smith. This should soften your heart towards him, because we were all there. We all did the exact same thing. He was just the first person to do it. Unfortunately, power got to him and corrupted him like absolute power almost always does. And he did a lot of things that he shouldn't, with girls, with foster daughters, with others. He lied, he strung people out. He turned the Mormon church into an enterprise of land grab so you could then sell it at a higher price later from town to town. There are lots of issues. I think that this narrative resolves all the conflict about who Sidney Rigdon and Solomon Spaulding must have been. I love John Hamer. You can go read the post that he wrote many years ago. I think he called it the Spaulding Fable, where he wasn't trying to create a straw man argument about what the Spaulding-Rigdon theory was, but he wasn't able to see it because he didn't have the Kircherisms and the Monmorisms and the extra evidence and the Dartmouthisms, etc. He couldn't see it in a way that allowed Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith to be good, honest people the best that they knew how. But if we all, and this is the lesson in it for all of us, if we give each other the grace, we don't have to turn ourselves immediately, or our foes, or into villains. None of us wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I think I was the villain in my own story. We just aren't wired to be that way. Sidney Rigdon never thought he was the villain, and Joseph Smith never thought he was the villain. And both of them had good reasons to think that something divine and special was happening in their lives. And that is because Solomon Spaulding, under the tutelage of Professor John Smith, was such a great writer with fun plot, with interesting Hebraisms, with chiasms, with Nephi, with Mormon, and they told an amazing story, and it was believable. Hell, it's 4 million Mormons today. Well, 16 million Mormons today.
However many, no.
However many Mormons there are today.
Yep.
Really believe it.
No question.
Right. The
So,
reason why they believe it is because Solomon Spaulding and Professor John Smith did a good job.
Lars, one of the big arguments against that would be that Rigdon and Smith had never met prior to when they, or at least when Rigdon goes to see him after he's already seen the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
How do you solve that issue, or what's your thoughts on that issue?
Is it the Parley P. Pratt connection? I know a lot of people feel that.
Yeah, there is a lot to the Parley P. Pratt connection. There, I think, are some extra connections too. I think that Sidney Rigdon did go to Palmyra at or near Palmyra in 1825. That may have been where Parley P. Pratt got the idea that when he would go out to Ohio, he was like impressed with the guy, and he's like, I've got to start over. I'm not making it on my own. I've been swindled, like everyone would say in those days. And that may be part of the reason why Parley P. Pratt went out to Bainbridge, Ohio, and immediately read his biography. I really analyzed that well in the book, why he started up with Sidney Rigdon as opposed to anyone else. So there is more to the story. One thing that I hope I do well in the book is recognize that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, and who got a lot of things right and who got some things wrong. But like Howard and Vanek and Davis, and who really wrote the Book of Mormon, and the Spaulding Enigma, and the Jockers Criddle study, a lot of people had a lot of the pieces, and they just didn't have them quite right, but they were so close, and they did such great work. I decided in this book not to rehash everything that all the Rebecca Eichbaum affidavit, and well, what about the Pittsburgh post office, and Sidney Rigdon and Solomon Spaulding are like on the same piece of paper? That must mean that they were friends. Well, it doesn't mean that they were friends, but what does it mean? You know, people, I think part of the problem is that sole authorship theorists, you know who you are, have been stuck in the minutia for so long that they have swallowed their own arguments and started to say things like, well, there are hundreds of people who wrote affidavits with nothing to gain financially or personally in multiple towns across multiple decades. But for some reason, all of them had collective memory distortion. All of them. Okay, all right. If that's what you need to do to make your sub-theory within sole authorship theory work, fine, we need you to support that theory and argue it as strong as you can, and keep doing it, keep arguing for it, because it just helps in develop the contrast when people see a better theory. And this is where I should say the best scientists and the best historians aren't necessarily the ones who happen to be right. The best historians and scientists are the ones who take an idea and say, has this idea been fleshed out fully? Even though I don't necessarily believe it, maybe I do believe it. But, quantum mechanics out here, that's a little far out. I'm going to kind of go with another theory. And they keep pushing it for 20 years, and they're wrong. And they're the better scientists. Why? Because they made sure that every possible avenue that could save that theory was investigated. It was exhaustive. And in the end, they say, I concede this field of research, this theory is now closed, and they're ready to move on. I'm not saying that with my book, it's time to close the sole authorship theory. I'm saying it's time for those people to recognize whether there is anything else exhaustive to do there. And if there is, keep doing it. And then when you're sure that there's nothing else to do there, then tell the rest of the community, I'm fine deprecating or discounting that theory at long last. But then the rest of us can be more confident in how we move forward, right? So Dan Vogel, keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great. I love your books.
We love Dan.
He's amazing, of course.
He's amazing.
Fawn Brody was amazing. She happened to be wrong about sole authorship theory. That doesn't mean she's not amazing, right?
Yeah. There's no end to research. Nobody can put a cap on it. Everybody can keep going. And I find it really interesting. Information is great, but also where there's a lack of information and it's there. For example, discussing perhaps somebody collecting a lot of maybe Kircher information and then making it not available. I like to look at things that are hidden and the reasons that they're hidden. And to me, that's very telling. So, and I know there's some of that in your book too. The information there has been collected and then suppressed. To me, those are real avenues to explore why have things been kept under wraps. Why?
So we're going to go there.
That seems unrelated, because that makes it extremely unrelated depending on who's collecting it and how hard they're trying not to make it available. So that's fascinating to me.
So you want to go there? We'll go there.
I mean, you don't have to. I'm trying to give a teaser, but I'm saying that part was very interesting to me. And being somebody that worked at BYU, not in special collections, but had a lot to do with special collections. Things like that are interesting to me when you allude to the fact that things are collected and not made public.
So here is a figure. This is another obelisk. It's got a fascinating story behind it. And I'll just give you the really quick version, that two young scholars had a mind to divert themselves a little at Kircher's expense. And they made up this fictitious piece of paper with these drawings on it that kind of look like hieroglyphs, but not exactly. Maybe they were like reformed in a way. They were making fun of Athanasius Kircher. And they presented to him and they're like, this just in, we've got another obelisk that's brand new. It's got new figures in it. Some of them look like reformed figures like you were talking about. Holy cow, can you translate this for us? And he does. And he does it in an interesting way. He translates it into Arabic and into Latin, which is at the bottom. The Arabic is on both sides. And of course, scholars can see that the Arabic and the Latin match. So they go, he must be right. He must have gotten the right translation because the two languages happen to match. Gosh, this guy scores a bullseye. But of course, the translation has nothing to do with what it is. And it's not even a real obelisk. It's a grotesque. And they were making fun of him. And it became a big hoax. And he became a bit of a laughingstock for it. But people wanted just to see, what?
It was the Kinderhook plates.
It was the Kinderhook plates.
Of their day.
Kircher. Exactly. I love that. Yeah. I try to make that, you said it better. And so eventually Kircher has to own up to it. And what does he say? He says, well, my translation was based on the codex of Barachias Nephi. So if the translation is wrong, it's not my weakness in writing, it's the weakness of Barachias Nephi. And you're just like, oh wow.
It's the weakness of men.
That's right.
Yeah, it's not my weakness. And you're just like, Now, you can see at the top of this, scholars today, you can read Daniel Stolzenberg's Egyptian Oedipus. He's arguably the foremost scholar on Kircher today. He's got a lovely book. I cite it several times. I made sure that it was the first thing that I cited in the book. Of course, he's not a Mormon. He's never made the connections between Nephi and he's never studied the word Mormon or Monmor. Like I've gone through everything he's ever written. And he's not a Mormon, so he's not going to try to draw these connections. And if someone were to show them to him, he probably wouldn't be able to recognize them for what they could be if you had the full picture, because it's not his field. You need someone interdisciplinary, right, in order to be able to really get at this. Nonetheless, you can see at the top, there it is, Berechiah Abba Nephi. And someone might say, oh, but that's not Nephi. That's, in this case, Alba Nephi. So that's not real. That's what you're grasping at straws here. No, all scholars agree. His name was, I'll show you more evidence of it, Rabbi Berechiah Nephi. What happened is over time, people would refer to him as Abba Nephi because Abba Nephi, and he was a rabbi. Abba is sometimes short for rabbi, like the father of the Catholic Church is a father priest, Father Nielsen or whatever. And of course, an Abba would be a Jewish rabbi. And Abba, A-B-B-E, if you Latinize it, romanticize it, that's Abba, but for French and for Latin and for Italian and the languages that Kircher was studying and producing his books in. So for a couple of decades, he goes by Abba Nephi, but it becomes a contraction, Abba Nephi, and A-B-B-E-N-E-P-H-I. And also in other books, you can see the evolution. It's really interesting. And this, he's quoted hundreds of times. This is not just a few instances. Other times it's abbreviated to Abba Nephi with one B. Also, it has been Alba Nephi, and we're not really sure exactly why that happened, but you can do some digging and tell me. I'd love to know. But some people heard it phonetically as Ibn Nephi because Kircher presented Nephi as a part Jewish, part Egyptian linguist who spoke Hebrew but wrote in this reformed Egyptian language that is the basis of Prodromus Coptus. Of course, all of that's not true. Before you all, the Mormons hear that and say, we proof that the book is true. But Ibn Nephi, Ibn in Latin means son of. So some scholars thought maybe he was Ibn Nephi, the son of Nephi, and that created some misunderstandings, including with people who were employed, like you were saying, at BYU during the time that they were collecting Kircheriana, which I'm getting to in a minute. So that's why it says on this one, Berechiah Alba Nephi. However, I'll show you something fun. This is a letter that Claude Fabry de Peresque wrote in 1633, in which he said, I think that Athanasius Kircher is lying. I think he's making up Rabbi Berechiah Nephi. He wrote it in his journal. He wrote it in letters to Claude Sumet, who is one of his contemporary linguists. And here it is, Athanasius Kircher, Berechiah Nephio. And then you can read it in French. This is a little bit archaic French, but you can see it clearly. Maybe I can make it a little bigger. The Right Father Athanasius Kircher, German Jesuit, here in Aix, or was in Aix, ex-France, on the 13th of September, 1633, showing to me a petite volume of Rabbi Berechiah Nephi of Babylon. And it's Nephi, as Nephi, Rabbi Berechiah, that was his official name, made-up name, of Babylon. And, you know, he talks all about what he's seeing and whether or not he believes it and what they should do about it. I talk about Claude Sumet's response to that in the book. And what is absolutely clear is he dresses him, he doesn't believe him, but he had paid money, kind of like Martin Harris did, to get Kircher transferred to Rome so that he could become the professor of Oriental languages there. What was Kircher's motivation for this? Why would somebody lie? Well, people do things to get a good job sometimes. Yeah. And he was a Jesuit priest in Mainz, and he did not like it being there. Not one little bit did he like being in Mainz, because during the 30 Years' War, people all around him were being tarred and feathered. Literally, I've got quotes of that, like sources on that, and they were being killed. And there were even a number of fathers in his order stationed with him at Mainz and in Paderborn that were murdered during the 30 Years' War, because it was this great battle between the Protestants and the Catholics. Excuse me. And he needed to get the hell out of there. And so he made up a lie. He said, while I was in the library of Prince Electorate of Mainz, I found in the catacombs, in the stacks, these ancient writings of Barachias Nephi. He was a rabbi. And from that, I'm able to elucidate this reformed or intermediate language, the Prodromus Coptus. And they were like, genius, amazing. This is exactly what we need, because we've got all these obelisks all over Rome, and we don't know how to translate. Do they have ancient wisdom in them? Do they have sacrifices or sacraments? We don't know. How they've been blessed and with holy water and stuff. So they're not, if they have demonic stuff in them, they're purging them. So we're fine, but we still need to translate them. And they're like, we got our man. And so he was transferred. He got out of the war zone. And that's why he lied, to save his life.
Save his life. Interesting.
But now he had to live with that lie and build on that lie for the rest of it. And he did. And some smart people like Claude Faubourg de Belesque called him on it, knew about it, but he died in 1636. And we have his journals, and I quote from his journals, and he talks about how Kircher was a hoaxster, but yet since Kircher outlived him, he gets to revise the history. And if you read Kircher's biography, he says, as soon as I showed him my codex, he was the happiest he's ever been. And so he never stopped in supporting and patronizing me for the rest of my life. He was like my chief supporter. And you're like, wow, he sure did revise his own history when it came time to write his own history. That sounds familiar too. So now here's an interesting question. Where do you think I found this document where Rabbi Barachias Nephi is being called out as the fictitious source of Athanasius Kircher? I found it in the Hugh Nibley Ancient Studies Reading Room at BYU.
Okay.
How is that possible? Who at BYU knows about this document? Why do they have it? Did Nibley read it? Did he understand it? Did he have someone else get it for him, but then he never got around to reading it? Why did I find it in BYU and no one at BYU found it in BYU? Or if they did, they decided to hide it from the rest of the world. Do they not think that this was interesting? It might be a parallel. And since it might be a parallel, it's going to be academically responsible for us not to tell anyone. No, the academically responsible thing would be to tell someone in the Mormon History Association, someone who left and was an apostate. There are a few of those out there, or people who retired. I don't know if Brian Hagelin knew about this or not, but some people knew because it's there. Now, and it's the culture, of course. I mean, if you're going to go to the temple, most of these people would have made covenants that they would slit their throats from ear to ear if they ever did anything to not defend the Church of Jesus Christ with all their heart, might, mind, and strength, talents, money, blessing, everything that they've been blessed with, everything that they might be blessed with. Man, you're going to be quiet if you see something that's potentially that explosive.
Well, there's a history of that, yes. Think about versions of the first vision being actually cut out of journals and then, when they're finally called, Scotch tape back in. So yeah, there's a history of protecting the narrative.
The Daughters of the Utah Pioneers got rid of a lot of texts that were damning to the church. We hear. So
yeah.
Why are people doing that? Now look at this. Figure 31. I wanted to give these people the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to give A. Dean Larson, Hugh Nibley, Brian Merrill, the benefit of the doubt. And so what I did is I went to BYU Special Collections and I said, I'd like to see everything that's in the sealed file for A. Dean Larson. Now he died, and they have a policy at BYU that you don't open up the archives. When you die as a professor, especially of special collections, everything, all your filing cabinets, your personal notes, your journals, everything goes into special collections, and it's sealed for 25 years. No one gets to look at it. No, not a professor, not another administrator. It's time that because there might be something that could be damaging in it. And that's the policy. And I went to them and said, I want to open the seal on A.D. Larsen's file early. And they said, I don't know if we can do that. And I said, I'll wait. And I waited all day. And the legal department then came out and said, we're going to do a review. But when we're done with the review, you can see it. And so I said, that's fine. And I came back and I looked at everything in the file. And here are some of the things that I found. These are collection cards from the A.D. Larsen file within BYU Special Collections. And these show that, and I've got purchase records and email, not what emails didn't exist, letters that go all the way back to the 1970s that show that 20 years before Ensign Peak Advisors was created, long before the Mormon Church got out of debt, they were spending prodigious amounts of money on collecting the works of Athanasius Kircher and immediately, not with delay, immediately shoving them in the vault. And all of these cards say vault at the top. They have timestamps.
Yeah.
You can see these are the works of Athanasius Kircher. This is Arca Noae. This is Magneticum. I can't read. My eyes are so bad. I'm getting old.
I knew Dean Larsen. I was at BYU at this time. I wish I would have known about this. I might have snuck down to special. This is my era. I had no idea that this was happening, that these purchases were taking place. I did not.
And no one did. And that was by design. And I don't think that A.D. Larsen knew really what he was collecting and what he was doing. I don't think he did. I very much believe that Hugh Nibley did, and that he went to the brethren and said, we have a problem. And they said, here are the funds, go get it. Because this was in the pre-internet, pre-computer era.
Exactly. I also knew Hugh Nibley at that era. I lived right next door to him. I once saw him carrying like this weird sarcophagus. My bedroom window was right across from his. So God, I could have made a huge difference had I been aware. I could have looked into this. Dang it.
You have made a huge difference, and everything that you did back then has prepared you for what you're doing now. So
that's the way to look at it. I'm just saying I can see this happening because everybody was there in that era. Things could happen under the radar because there was no internet. There was no way to connect. And especially the scholars, they were just kind of operating on this level that was really interesting.
Have you been able to get to these sources, or were the things in the vault, they're still in the vault?
All of these things, so this is amazing and it's fun. You see, at the time, Hugh Nibley did his job very well. He made sure that no one at BYU knew the truth about Athanasius Kircher and about his Nephi and the spiritually magnetic compasses. And even though pictures of these things, the Barachias Nephi obelisk, these spiritually magnetic compasses, the name Nephi on several different papers in the books, it's all there in the vaults, but they didn't show it to anybody. And Nibley's purpose in doing that was, and he didn't even share it with the lawyers because he didn't believe or trust the lawyers. This is me projecting a little bit onto him. So I think we can all tell that I'm not speaking for him about what actually happened in his psychology. But I suspect that Hugh Nibley thought, we can't even trust the lawyers with this information. So we're going to put it all in the vault. And I'm going to say a few things in like the New Era magazine. And I'm going to say a few things just to try to say there's nothing to see here and hope that nobody ever finds stuff. Now, there is enough Kircherism in the world. You know, you can't buy every copy of Arca Noae. You can't buy every, right? And of course, it's all digitized now. And even though it's not translated into English, it is downloadable, almost all of his works, to virtually any computer in the world. But he had no concept that that's where the world was going in 1979. So he wanted to get all this stuff in the vault as much as he could to like raise the prices probably of the things that people could buy, which was already extremely rare collector's items. You know, some of these books went for like 15,000 pounds. And this is before anybody, I'm sure that now everybody knows about this. All of this stuff is going to skyrocket. But
BYU was collecting them at these prices. That's what makes it really unusual.
Yeah. While they're in debt or going in debt, they had to stop building the church office building because they were in so much debt. And yet that's the same time period.
You're right. These are the types of things that the church was doing when they were in debt when they were not paying for things that they probably should have been paying for. And now we're starting to understand the reason why. The keystone of the Mormon religion is the Book of Mormon. And if you finally understand how the Book of Mormon came to pass, then you either believe Elder Holland, who said everything rises or falls with the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. And I think on that, he was right. He's not right about a lot of things, but he's right.
No, he's absolutely right on that. But you alluded to the fact that Nibley, this was mentioned in some of the church periodicals. The name Kircher was mentioned, or
yes. And this is so fascinating.
I'm really interested in that.
Yeah, I think he wrote an article. I talk about it at length in the book called Prolegomenon to Any Study of the Book of Abraham. He, in a number of magazines, the New Era, I think, is the one he has the most number of citations, but it's only like a handful, But he says things like, yeah, even the immortal Athanasius Kircher thought he could get away with ancient Egyptians, with studying and elucidating the hieroglyphics, but he was nothing compared to Joseph Smith, yada, yada, yada. And then that's it. So he mentions
like an inoculation.
It's inoculation. It's inoculation from the very beginning. Yes.
Huh.
And when he does cite Kircher, he only really ever cites 3 journals. There's Maristron, Recueil des Travaux, and Chronique d'Égypte, which are written in French. So clearly, he's studying Athanasius Kircher in French, and he served his mission. Well, his father was the mission president of the Wallonia region. He had a French tutor when he got back to the States, and he loved French. So he was studying Athanasius Kircher in French, and he was like the quintessential Mormon for trying to find connections between nouns, especially proper nouns, in all kinds of languages that are in the Book of Mormon. You want to bet that he didn't know who Pierre de Monmort was, that he didn't know who the character Mormon based on him, who him was. If you're going to search for any names in different languages and study Athanasius Kircher in French, you're going to find it.
You're going to find
I don't have proof that he had things, but there are things in his sealed collection that no one can see. I bet he has a copy of L'Upars et Mormons, Histoire Comique, in his personal archives that are sealed, and they will never be opened unless we call for a boycott at BYU. Open the vaults or we don't go to class.
That's right.
That's
open
what we
the
need.
Vault. Open the
vault. Vault. Hashtag open the vault, exclamation point. Come on.
And while you're at that, let's open the granite mountain vaults, right? We taped an episode on that we're going to put out pretty soon. Who knows what's in there? So, oh my goodness, we could go on and on. This is just incredible. Can you pull up just a picture of the cover of the book? And we just barely scratched the surface here, everybody. And Landon and Lars and I had a conversation for about an hour prior to this with even more information. There it is. So, whether you listen to this and think this just sounds crazy, or you listen to it and go, this fills in some gaps of some of the things I've already been thinking and researching, buy the book. Let's read this. Let's figure this out. Let's talk about this. Landon, do you have any other thoughts or anything as we kind of close here? So this has just been amazing.
Yeah, no, I've learned a lot. I've never heard of some of these things or these people. The effort that you've put into this, Lars, is just incredible. I think you said you had it reviewed by some Mormon scholars, some historians. I think you say you got some mixed reaction from that. And now you put it out, and it's open for the public to start looking and critiquing. And as you said, I love what you said. If I have something wrong, let me know. Yeah. This is a starting point, and let's go from there. And I think this is incredible, and I'm fascinated. I don't know if you heard my dog barking during this. I think the Amazon truck showed up with your book.
I gotta go.
So it was supposed to be here this morning. So
thank you for saying that, Landon. And I'll just say, let's do it together. And this time, let's do it with the principles that we all grew up with. Let's do it with kindness and charity and long-sufferingness. Let's give people grace. Give me a little bit of latitude. I'm not a professional. Give Dan Vogel, give Patrick Mason, give everybody a little bit of grace. Brent Metcalf, everybody was right and everybody was wrong. And now it's time to learn from all of our mistakes, including mine, and we'll move forward together. But let's not do it in a way that has any kind of spite or vitriol. Let's do it with healing. Let's do it with patience. If you're not ready to jump into the book, don't jump into it. Don't send 50 copies to all of your Mormon loved ones, hoping that it will destroy them. Don't do that. Let's be smart. Let's be kind. Let's be Christ-like. And let's be like Professor John Smith. Let's be like Solomon Spaulding. Let's be like Sidney Rigdon. And let's be the best version that we know of Joseph Smith. Okay? And I will just say that if that works for you and we go on this journey together, I went without a salary for many years so that I could do this, not because I wanted to make a lot of money. I don't think I'll ever be made whole from book sales or speaking engagements or anything.
None of us make money doing this, that's for sure.
No. We're in the hole doing that.
That's right. I'm doing this because, like what I did in leaking the truth to the Washington Post, there is some knowledge that everyone deserves to have. Now, if you want me to make this stuff free to everyone in the world, you want me to drop my price of my book to the cost of printing, here's my challenge. I will do that if you can make me whole. Don't make me rich, but just make me whole for the couple of years of salary that I lost. If there are rich people out there who want to do that, there's a donate button. You can call me. As soon as I get enough that I'm like, can help with my kids' college education and start putting money towards my retirement again and get out of the very hefty home equity loan that I took out on my house so that I could do this nonstop full time, be kind to me as I'm kind to you. And I will drop the price as low as it possibly can. The ebook will be free. Well, maybe 13 cents or whatever.
Yeah.
So please, let's flood the earth with the truth about how the Book of Mormon came to pass.
And there it is. And it's time. Landon and I have said this for a long time. We feel that a lot of people have a lot of pieces, but not everybody necessarily works together because they're all on different pages. It is time to work together, I think, because there's an answer. And I think a lot of us, I think we're close. I feel like we're very close. And this definitely moves the needle as we dig in and read. So thank you so much for bringing this to us. And please, everybody, comment. I'm sure you're probably already commenting like crazy just as we go through this, as we're airing it. Grab the book, the version that Landon got, that was Kindle, right? It was only $9.99. I mean,
I got the Kindle and the paperback. I
Yeah,
got both.
that
I like
should
to have
never-
the hard copy too.
I know. I think the
can have in
paperback
my
just
hands.
arrived. So yeah, we just wanted to present this as this thing that just kind of burst on the scenes a couple days ago. And this is just the beginning. I'm sure even by the time this airs, there'll be even more momentum. So please let us know what you think. And please check out the book, check out the website. As Lars has said, and it's funny because he said, I'll get right back to you. This is how and why he's on this podcast. I went to the website as soon as I saw the announcement, and in the little, contact us, I put, hi, I'm Rebecca. Would you? Instantly, I get this email back, this reply, sure, let's talk. So he's very receptive to questions, to dialogue, which the fact that you're so open, that just speaks volume to everything. Yeah.
And to criticism.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And there'll be, we've had other guests on our podcast where it's just been rolling in, but the criticism also pushes the needle because then everybody's working and they're looking at it and they're assessing the criticism. Is that merited? Is it not? So yeah, this is just the beginning. So, all right, everybody, please like and subscribe to Mormonish. You can hit the notification bell if you'd like to be made aware when there are new episodes. You can always financially support Mormonish Podcast. There are links in the show notes to PayPal and Venmo and to mormonishpodcast.org. We really appreciate everyone that does help us financially. We couldn't do it at all without you. And also we have a new link to our Mormonish merch. If you feel like watching an episode while you're drinking your beverage of choice from a Mormonish mug or wearing a Mormonish hat, you can go to that link and purchase some Mormonish merchandise. And thank you again, everybody, so much. And thank you, Lars. We will have you back on again in a while once this, like you said, the stone is cut out of the mountain. It's rolling. It's just starting. So this is excellent. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye from Mormonish. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.